Imagine being a child, small and fragile, forced to grow up in the shadows of fear. 8-year-old Ethan Parker lived that nightmare every single day. His stepfather was not a protector, but a tormentor, a man who twisted the innocence of a home into a prison of silence. The bruises on Ethan's arms were hidden under long sleeves, and the quiet tears shed at night were muffled beneath his pillow. But what couldn't be hidden was the hollow look in his eyes, a silent scream for help that no one seemed to hear. Until one day, Ethan made a desperate move that would change everything. He scribbled a message, clutched it with trembling hands, and slipped it into the mailbox addressed not to police, not to family, but to the Biker Brotherhood, a local motorcycle club known for their tough appearance, but also their surprising compassion for the weak. His words were simple but heartbreaking. Please help me. He hurts me. I have no one else. Now, pause for a moment and let this sink in. A little boy so desperate that he reached out to complete strangers. Would you ignore a cry like that? If you're already hooked by what happened next, make sure to like this video and subscribe to The Twisted Minds. Because trust me, this story is only just beginning, and you don't want to miss the shocking truth that unfolds. The letter, passed from one biker to another, soon spread like wildfire. The group leader, a man known simply as Steel, read Ethan's words under the dim glow of a garage light. He clenched the paper in his weathered hands, his jaw tightening. Steel had seen the worst of humanity on the streets, but nothing prepared him for the raw pain hidden in a child's handwriting. He made a vow then and there. This boy will never feel alone again. What Steel didn't know was that this vow would not stay within the four walls of his club. It would ripple across the entire country, sparking a movement no one saw coming. Within days, word spread across biker networks, social media, and Brotherhood chapters far beyond their small town. The response was overwhelming. What started as a promise from one group of bikers snowballed into a nationwide rally. Messages poured in from clubs across states. We're ride for Ethan. Count us in. No child stands alone. The numbers grew, and soon the unthinkable happened. More than 10,000 bikers pledged to show up. Picture it, a roar of engines echoing through the horizon, leather jackets emblazoned with patches of loyalty and fire, men and women hardened by the road, but softened by the plea of a child. This was no ordinary gathering. It was a force of humanity standing tall against cruelty. The day was set. Ethan would finally see that he wasn't invisible, and the man who broke him with fear would face something far more powerful than fists. He would face unity, love, and justice in its rawest form. As the date drew closer, anticipation surged. Ethan, sitting by his window, didn't fully understand what was happening. He only knew he had asked for help, and for once, someone had answered. For the first time in years, hope flickered in his chest like a fragile flame waiting to burn bright. What came next would not only shock Ethan's stepfather, it would shock the entire world. The morning of the ride arrived with a silence that felt heavy, as if the entire town was holding its breath. Ethan sat curled up on the porch steps, knees tucked into his chest, his small hands trembling as he waited for something he still wasn't sure was real. His stepfather had left for work earlier, muttering threats under his breath as usual, and Ethan knew the man would return later with anger in his fists. But today was different. Today, something was coming. At first, there was only a faint hum in the distance. Ethan tilted his head, uncertain. Then it grew louder and louder, until suddenly, the air was split by the thunderous roar of motorcycle engines rolling down the highways. 10, 50, hundreds at first. And then, as the horizon blurred with movement, it became thousands. Over 10,000 bikers from across the country descended on Ethan's town like a living storm of leather, chrome, and raw power. Neighbors peeked out from their windows, jaws dropping as the endless wave of riders filled the streets. Some feared them at first. These weren't men in polished suits or friendly uniforms. These were tattooed giants with beards, dark glasses, and jackets stitched with skulls and flames. But what people failed to see at first glance was the heart that beat beneath those patches. At the center of it all rode Steel, his massive frame commanding respect. He raised his gloved hand, and the ocean of bikes slowed, their engines rumbling in unison like thunder rolling across the sky. Every single one of those riders had come for one reason: Ethan. Steele dismounted his bike, his boots hitting the ground with a heavy thud. He walked toward the small house where Ethan sat frozen on the steps. The boy's wide, tearful eyes locked onto the man's steady gaze. In that moment, the world shrank down to the two of them. The child who thought no one cared, and the leader who had promised him he'd never be alone again. Steele knelt down, eye level with Ethan, and removed his helmet. His face was rough, weathered by years of life on the road, but his voice was soft when he spoke. "Hey, little man, you called us, and we heard you. We're here now. You don't have to be afraid anymore." Ethan's lip quivered as tears spilled down his cheeks. He had expected maybe one person, maybe two, but this army of guardians who had shown up for him. It was beyond anything his young mind could have imagined. He whispered, barely audible, "You really came." Steele smiled faintly. "We all came." Behind him, the crowd of bikers erupted in cheers and horns. Some revved their engines in salute. Others raised fists to the sky. The sound was deafening, but to Ethan, it was the sweetest music he had ever heard. It was the sound of belonging, the sound of people who would fight for him. And they didn't just ride for show. That day, the bikers formed a human shield around Ethan's house, taking turns standing guard. Neighbors, once hesitant, began bringing food, water, and support, inspired by the sheer force of compassion they were witnessing. News cameras arrived, broadcasting the unbelievable sight across the nation. Headlines blared, 10,000 bikers rally for abused boy. The story spread like wildfire, turning Ethan from an invisible child into a symbol of courage. But not everyone was moved by the spectacle. Across town, Ethan's stepfather heard the news. Rage boiled inside him. How dare this boy, his boy, betray him? He clenched his fists, his mind racing with vengeance. But what he didn't realize was that the game had changed. The power he once held over Ethan was gone, stripped away by the roar of 10,000 engines. The bikers weren't just protecting Ethan. They were preparing for the confrontation that everyone knew was coming. And when it came, the world would see just how far a brotherhood could go to protect one of their own. The day the stepfather returned home was heavy with anticipation. The bikers had spent 2 days camping around Ethan's house, taking turns patrolling the yard, sharing meals, and making sure the boy laughed at least once every hour. For the first time in his life, Ethan slept through the night without waking up from nightmares. But even with thousands of guardians outside, a shadow still hung in the air, because everyone knew the man who caused the pain hadn't yet faced what was waiting for him. That shadow appeared late in the afternoon, in the form of a rusted pickup truck pulling into the street. The engine sputtered, but its sound was drowned out by the deafening rumble of motorcycles revving in unison. All eyes turned to the vehicle as it slowed, then stopped in front of the house. Inside sat a man with cold eyes, his face twisted in arrogance. Ethan's stepfather. He stepped out, slamming the door, trying to project confidence. But he wasn't met with fear. He was met with silence. A silence so heavy it pressed on his chest. 10,000 eyes stared him down. 10,000 bodies stood as one, forming an unbreakable wall between him and the child he once controlled. Steele walked forward first, his boots crunching against the gravel. Behind him, dozens of other bikers followed like shadows. Ethan's stepfather sneered, forcing a laugh. "What the hell is this circus? You think you can just take my boy away from me?" His voice cracked at the end, betraying the anger for what it really was: fear. Steele's voice was low, calm, but it cut through the air like a blade. "He's not your boy. He's not your punching bag. He's not your victim anymore. He's ours now. And we don't let anyone hurt our family." The man's bravado faltered. He tried to step forward, but the line of bikers closed in tighter, their massive frames like a fortress. One of them, a woman named Raven with fairy red hair, crossed her arms and growled, "Take another step, and you'll wish you hadn't." Reporters huddled on the sidewalks, cameras capturing every second. The world was watching, and for once, it wasn't the child who was powerless. It was the abuser. The stepfather spat on the ground, his hands shaking. "You can't stop me. He's mine. The law says." But before he could finish, a police cruiser pulled up. Two officers stepped out, their eyes scanning the scene. One of them, clearly familiar with the bikers, gave Steele a nod. He turned to the stepfather. "Not anymore. We got your record, your priors, and now, thanks to this boy's bravery, we've got enough to put you away." The color drained from the man's face. He looked around desperately. But there was no escape. Every street, every corner, every path was lined with bikers, their engines humming like thunderclouds about to break. As the officers cuffed him, Ethan peeked from the doorway. For the first time, he saw his stepfather powerless, dragged into the back of a squad car like the criminal he was. The boy's chest heaved as tears streamed down his face, not tears of fear but of release. The monster was gone. The crowd erupted in cheers, engines roaring so loud the ground trembled. Steele turned back to Ethan, kneeling once again. "You see, little man, you're not alone. You'll never be alone again. We've got you." Ethan stumbled into his arms, burying his face against the leather jacket that smelled of oil and freedom. Around them, the bikers cheered louder, a wave of sound that shook the heavens. But this wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. Because while the stepfather was gone, the scars remained, and the Brotherhood had one more mission to help Ethan heal. In the days that followed the arrest, Ethan's world felt both strange and new. For the first time, the house that had been filled with fear now echoed with laughter, engines, and the clatter of boots instead of threats. The bikers didn't just protect him for one night. They stayed. They took shifts to watch over him, helped his mother file restraining orders and custody papers, and made sure the man who had haunted Ethan would never come back. But beyond all that, they did something Ethan had never felt before. They gave him family. Steele, Raven, and the others weren't just faces in the crowd anymore. They became constants. Steele taught Ethan how to hold a wrench, showing him how to tighten a bolt on one of the Harleys parked out front. Raven sat with him during quiet evenings, teaching him how to draw flames and skulls that she later painted onto helmets. A biker named Tank, a giant of a man with arms like tree trunks, showed up one morning with a stuffed bear patched with leather, telling Ethan, "Every warrior needs a sidekick." Ethan smiled wider than anyone had ever seen. But it wasn't only about fun. Healing came slowly, with nights when Ethan still woke up crying. Sometimes he couldn't speak about what had happened, and the pain was too heavy for his small shoulders. That's when the bikers truly proved who they were. They didn't demand words. They didn't push. They simply sat with him, quiet, steady, unshakable. One would sit by his bed, telling him road stories until he drifted back to sleep. Another would rev their bike outside his window, the deep vibration soothing him more than any lullaby could. The town, once skeptical, began to notice. What they had first seen as an intimidating army of leather and steel turned into something else entirely. Guardians who refused to back down when a child needed them most. Local churches and schools invited the bikers to talk about standing up against abuse. Donations flooded in from strangers across the country, moved by Ethan's bravery and the unity of the Brotherhood. One afternoon, Ethan climbed onto Steele's bike for the first time. The machine rumbled beneath him, the vibrations running through his tiny frame, and his smile stretched ear to ear. Steele leaned down, his voice rumbling like the engine itself. "You feel that, little man? That's freedom. That's power. That's yours now." They rode slowly at first, the boy clinging tightly. But as they rolled through the town, more bikers joined, forming a protective circle around the boy. They weren't just giving him a ride, they were showing him that wherever he went, he was surrounded, protected, loved. That night, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Steele gathered the boy and the rest of the bikers around a crackling fire. His voice carried the weight of a leader and the warmth of a father. "Ethan, you called us because you thought you had no one. But look around, you've got thousands. You're not a victim anymore. You're one of us now. A brother." The bikers cheered, raising their fists, their mugs, their helmets. Ethan, with wide shining eyes, whispered a word he hadn't spoken in years. family. Tears rolled down the cheeks of hardened men and women who had seen the ugliest parts of life. In that moment, Ethan wasn't just a boy who survived. He was a boy who was reborn, standing taller, braver, and stronger than ever. But the Brotherhood knew one last step remained. They had protected him, given him family, and shown him freedom. Now, they wanted the world to hear his story. And soon, Ethan's journey would be broadcast far beyond his small town, inspiring thousands of children who thought they were alone in the dark. Weeks passed, and the town slowly returned to normal, at least on the surface. Ethan's stepfather remained behind bars, facing charges that promised he would never harm another child again. The bikers still visited daily, though fewer now stayed overnight. Life was stabilizing, but Ethan's story was far from over. What no one expected was how quickly his plea, and the breathtaking response of 10 thousand bikers, would ripple across the nation. The images of Ethan, sitting on Steele's shoulders with a sea of motorcycles behind him, had been broadcast on television and shared millions of times online. The boy who once felt invisible was now a symbol of courage and hope for children everywhere who thought their cries would never be heard. Soon, reporters requested interviews. Non-profits for child advocacy reached out. Teachers used Ethan's story in classrooms to talk about bravery and speaking up. At first, Ethan was shy, hiding behind Steele's jacket during interviews. But with the Brotherhood at his back, his voice grew stronger. Eventually, he looked directly into the cameras, his eyes filled with a new kind of fire. "I thought I was alone," he said. "I thought no one cared. But they showed me I was wrong. If you're out there, and you're scared like I was, speak up. Someone will hear you. Someone will come." His words broke hearts and mended them at the same time. Across the country, children began stepping forward, telling teachers, friends, or family about their own pain. Calls to abuse hotlines skyrocketed. Lives were being saved, not by lawyers or politicians, but by an 8-year-old boy and a band of bikers who refused to look away. The Brotherhood organized rallies in Ethan's name, not just to ride, but to raise funds for shelters and programs protecting children. At one event, Steele placed a small leather vest on Ethan's shoulders. Sewn on the back was a patch that read, "Protected by 10,000. The crowd erupted in cheers. Ethan, beaming, lifted his fist to the sky. For once, the boy wasn't defined by bruises or silence. He was defined by strength, resilience, and the family that had chosen him. The bond between Ethan and the bikers didn't fade with time. It grew. Steele became a father figure, teaching him about responsibility, loyalty, and courage. Raven taught him that strength and softness could live in the same heart. Tank showed him that even giants could be gentle. They weren't just visitors anymore, they were family. His family. 1 year after the ride, Ethan stood on a stage at a national rally, facing thousands of bikers and supporters. He was taller, stronger, his voice steady as he spoke into the microphone. "I thought I was too small to make a difference. But I learned something. Even the smallest voice can roar if enough people listen. And I'll never stop speaking. For me, for kids like me, for anyone who thinks they're alone." The roar of engines that answered him shook the ground, not just in that moment, but in the hearts of everyone watching across the world. And so, Ethan's story wasn't just about one boy saved. It was about thousands of voices awakened. A reminder that sometimes, the most unlikely heroes don't wear capes. They wear leather, ride bikes, and show up when the world turns its back. And if you've been moved by Ethan's incredible journey, do us a favor. Hit the like button and subscribe to the Twisted Minds, because stories like these deserve to be heard, and together, we can keep amplifying the voices of the unheard. Ethan Parker once whispered into the void, hoping someone would listen. 10,000 bikers answered, and now, the whole world rides with him.